The concept of having more donors come out of the woodwork because they finally have a voice again and they finally feel like they get to be involved again is precisely what we need in this NIL era. However, it is also allowing some coaching names that are pretty wild to just kind of stay floating near the top.
You are Locked On Oklahoma State, your daily podcast on the Oklahoma State Cowboys, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Howdy, y'all, and hello, all. Welcome back to Locked On Oklahoma State, your top stop for all things Cowboy and Cowgirl related. My name is Cody Stovall. I want to thank you kindly for stopping by to make this your first listen. We're available on all of your podcasting platforms, visually as well on YouTube. Find me personally on the X at Aldeo State. Today, we're partially brought to you by Mazda, because like some of our players that sweat every detail, so does Mazda. When you make every move count, pulling off the unexpected is only the beginning. Stay tuned later for highlights in this week's Moving the Game Forward moment with Mazda, where you can move and be moved. Ladies and gentlemen, we've had some crazy names like Jon Gruden float up towards the top of this list, and we recently covered Gus Malzahn being an individual that has been a popular name recently. Now we have another name that seems to be grabbing a little bit more attention, and that is Dana Holgorsen. I don't know if we're going to negotiate this kind of deal with dollar bills or a massive Red Bull contract. Regardless, he did bring us the offensive creativity that allowed us to get our first and only Big 12 title under Mike Gundy. Naturally, Mike Gundy and Dana Holgorsen, they had a falling out. They never necessarily always got along. It was purported that was because Dana Holgorsen would basically tell Mike Gundy, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to run that play. I'm not going to run that system. I'm not going to run that set. And those were things that Mike Gundy, at the end of the day, was never a massive fan of because it was limiting some of his control. That offense that he was able to teach Brandon Weeden then helped teach Todd Monken, and voila, we get our Big 12 title game. But it was that Dana Holgorsen offense that inspired all of that run that Oklahoma State was able to make with the Brandon Weedens and the Justin Blackmons and the Joe Randalls of the world back in the day. So because of that, offensively, we still have a connection to Dana that does make this an applicable conversation. However, it's primarily being led by a couple big-time donors and their relationships that go back, right? Chad has a relationship that goes back with Dana, even obviously before Chad Weiberg was involved. And that is probably one of the biggest reasons why his name is being mentioned. And whenever I have some conversations with donors, for example, I asked one of my donor buddies, and I said, listen, if you have a top three, but your top three doesn't align with some of these other names that we're hearing, why is that? And he said, man, I only donate a few million a year. I'm a baby donor, and I don't have much of a voice when it comes to this coaching search. However, there might be 20 donors that synonymously are okay with one name, but they don't make near as much as maybe 3 or 4 donors that are pushing some of these bigger names. And you do have to appreciate the fact that our donors are willing to take these level of swings. The financial constraints in Stillwater are pretty visibly not as big of a deal as Mike Gundy has alluded to going into the Oregon game and even to some degree previously. But at the end of the day, I don't know that Dana Holgorsen would necessarily be the best fit in Stillwater, regardless of the tumultuous relationship that he had with Mike Gundy. The concept of him living in a hotel instead of ever getting a place kind of rubs some Oklahoma State fans the wrong way, or at least it rubbed me the wrong way, because it clearly showed an indication that he had no business or no desire to stay in Stillwater all that long. Could it have been because of the contentious relationship with Gundy? Sure, who knows? But at the end of the day, the fact that Dana Holgorsen's name is being mentioned is it's ironic. It's kind of fun. It's a little bit concerning. Because, Jon Gruden, he hadn't coached in college, so we don't know what that would look like. It's a good name. It's a big name. It's a big swing. I appreciate that. Gus Malzahn does have a national title under his belt, but his coaching stops as the head man have been a little bit less than desirable. I think the same is applicable for Dana Holgorsen. Can he run an offense? Yes. Can he recruit? Yes. Did he have a couple nice seasons at West Virginia? He did, but even West Virginia fans would say that there was a failure of capitalization. And that has been my biggest complaint about Mike Gundy in his entire tenure, is the lack of capitalization from the Dana Holgorsen, Todd Monken offensive systems that catapulted us into a Big 12 title. Our recruiting got a little bit better after that, but then it kind of fizzled back down, and we spent 15 years recruiting in the 50s and 60s more often than not. Dana would be able to provide some instant credibility, and even more so than that, the offensive innovations would be something that we're excited about. My only reservation is similar to Gus Malzahn, not even the game management obstacles that Gus had, but Dana hasn't been super successful as a head coach. And I don't know that this should be his reclamation project, because if you look at Nebraska, Dylan Raiola is supposed to be a Heisman level dude. I mean, he looks pretty good, but he's not over here shattering records, or offensively, Nebraska's not setting the bar of what the offense should look like. And some of these other names on this list, like Deion Sanders at plus 1,200. I'm sorry. I love Deion. I think he's good for the Big 12. I think he's a great story. I hope he gets Colorado into a completely different perception view. But I'm going to be honest with you. The stuff that happened with Shedeur and the fact that he did some things that were decent and it instantaneously means his name goes up into the Ring of Honor. To me, the nepotism factor kind of lessens the appeal for me on Deion Sanders. Will Stein at Oregon, he's obviously going to be a head coach at some point in time. I don't know that it's affordable for Oklahoma State in this particular situation, nor do I necessarily think that it's a great move. I don't think Tommy Rees would be a great move. Jeff Monken, what he's done at Army has been nothing short of phenomenal, but it's a completely different system. And I think if you try to incorporate that into the recruiting, it would be a little bit of an obstacle in Stillwater, Oklahoma. Some of those things are not applicable when we're talking about Dana Holgorsen. So the recruiting would probably at least stay the very same that it is now. It would likely get a little bit better. But my biggest question is going to be, who can he hire on the staff? Like, there's some guys like Zach Robinson and G.J. Guinea where it appears as though hiring staff isn't going to be a major obstacle. Not that it would be an obstacle for Dana. He's made tons of friends in this industry. I just don't know that this would be the right move. But it doesn't matter, because I'm not a donor that gives millions and millions of dollars a year to Oklahoma State. I'm not buddies with Dana Holgorsen. I can't text him and go have a beer with him whenever I want to. So it does make this conversation at least interesting, that we're willing to take some big name swings, and we're willing to at least explore the options of what an offensive attack under Dana Holgorsen or a Gus Malzahn could look like in Stillwater, Oklahoma. I think there's some other names that we need to discuss. Matter of fact, there's a name towards the bottom of the list that is pretty surprising that he's down that far, but there could be other job openings that are indicative of why his name is that low. But anywho, some of the donors that have enough money to have a ton of influence, they have relationships with Dana Holgorsen. And sometimes those relationships are more important than the practical application of who should be the next head coach in Stillwater, America. It is time to capitalize for us here as well. And I know sometimes college football is like a fickle mistress. That's okay, because the NFL season is here, and FanDuel's got an offer that you cannot miss. Right now, new customers can bet just $5 and get $300 back in bonus bets if you're a winner. All you have to do is pick a bet, put $5 down. If it hits, you'll unlock $300 back in bonus bets to use all across the app. It makes watching football much more exciting, because obviously your investment level is heightened. And you're going to have something riding on the action, whether it's a casual fan perspective, or if you like diving into the stats, or making same-game parlays, or getting into the player props. FanDuel makes the game day experience so much better, whichever avenue you're trying to explore. So what are you waiting for? Go explore now by visiting FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app today and get started. Head on over to FanDuel.com, the bee's knees for all of your betting needs. Go get squared away with a neighborhood square business, because the neighborhood that provides you with the familiarity is precisely what we're sometimes missing. And Square supports your neighborhood businesses that you love the most. These are the places that become an extension of our homes. So whether it's a sports bar dedicated to our favorite fan bases, or a spot with the best food, or the best game day environment, or for me personally, I like to run up to Safeway. That's where I get almost all of my groceries. When neighborhood businesses thrive, the whole neighborhood can rise together. Sports are something to bring neighborhoods together for sure, whether it's gathering for a game day ritual, or celebrating with the best wings in town, or simply just being part of the fan base that allows you to call your neighborhood home. This is an ad that makes no excuses. You need to go support your local spot and have yourself a day in the neighborhood. Square is a proud partner of more than 4 million neighborhood businesses around the world. You can go to square.com/go/lockedoncollege, all one word, to learn more. But before you do, go support your favorite neighborhood spot. I like to go into Safeway. They know exactly what I'm looking for. They mention me by name, and you're going to be happy that you do the same. Support your local neighborhood with a business that is supported by Square. Ladies and gentlemen, the first transfer portal exit that is concerning, problematic, and definitely surprising, David Kabongo. The safety that was an integral part of this last year's recruiting class, or 2 years ago's recruiting class, landed Cleveland, David Kabongo, those were the dudes that were able to rally the troops and make the recruiting class that much better. And you have seen a decent portion of David Kabongo. You saw a lot of him this previous season. And he's not one of those individuals that has been late to stuff and has been problematic and has been causing division in the locker room. So if we're looking for the Cowboy culture guys that we know that we can rely on for building into the future, David Kabongo seemed to be one of those dudes. More often than not, some of the names that we've heard enter the portal thus far, they weren't that big of a loss, in my personal opinion. But David Kabongo is a really big loss, not just because of what he provides, the fact that he's able to play significantly as a freshman, naturally a very big deal. I think he was going to be one of the cornerstones of the backside of the defense moving forward. Could this have a correlating piece to Coach Greg Brown leaving and DeAndre Boykins leaving and Zaquan Patterson's unceremonious exit from Stillwater, Oklahoma? Perhaps. But the biggest issue in all of this is the fact that David Kabongo, landed Cleveland, Tamarick Johnson, Jonathan Agumedu, Armstrong Nodum, they were all a crew that came together. They worked out together in Texas. They talked about their visits to Oklahoma State. They talked about the recruiting process, and they talked about staying committed together as a squad. So there was a squad of like 7 dudes that came from close to the same areas in Texas that planned on being part of Oklahoma State's future. And now David Kabongo is the first one of that bunch that has entered the transfer portal midseason this year. This could be problematic, right? Because, again, most of the names that are likely to enter their name into the portal this early on were probably dudes that weren't factored into the starting lineup much, or they weren't factored into the NIL earners that are supposed to be on the field, or perhaps even they weren't brought in by some of these coaches to be their guys. David Kabongo clearly was an individual that Oklahoma State could rely on that was able to help keep this class intact. And now we've seen an emergence from Armstrong Nodum. It seems as though Landon Cleveland is dialing in a little bit more. Tamarick Johnson, Gunnar Wilson, they're all having more opportunities on special teams. So when you lose somebody like a David Kabongo, that's a big deal because of what it could equal, right? If a crew of 7 dudes, 8 dudes came together, and obviously we know Jonathan Agumedu has already transferred to North Carolina after the spring. But outside of that, most of this crew has been able to stay intact in Stillwater up until today. Now that David Kabongo enters the transfer portal, it's the first time I've been concerned about having a transfer loss. And again, it's not so much so that David Kabongo entered the portal. It's terrible. I think it sucks. But the ramifications from him entering could be pretty big. Because I think if they came together, there's a potential that they could all leave together. Now, you haven't seen some of the other guys that all came together enter the transfer portal. So it will be interesting to see what takes place as we head on over to the desert of Arizona to take on the Wildcats. Because I would imagine David Kabongo was supposed to play a significant amount in this ball game. He may maybe not start because he didn't start this previous first half, but he played the entire second half of Baylor, played very, very well. last season when everybody was hooting and hollering about Landon Cleveland being a big-time get that turned down the Texases of the world to come to Stillwater and how he was likely going to factor into playing immediately as a true freshman. And then one of the first true freshmen we've seen rolled out was David Kabongo. It was a big surprise. But whenever you talk to some dude in the locker room, it's because David Kabongo was progressing at a pretty rapid pace. There was never any denying athletically guys like Landon Cleveland could do some things that most of the other players could not do. But David Kabongo was able to both physically show that he could handle the spring, handle the fall, handle the nicks and the dings and the minor injuries here and there, absorb the play calling system, and make it applicable immediately. It took Landon Cleveland a little bit of time before he was able to get to that level, and then Landon had an injury. So David Kabongo has largely stayed healthy. He's largely already proven that he could start in the Power 4, in the Big 12 as a true freshman. So he's not going to have any shortage of opportunities. And maybe that's another layer of this, right? This is the unintended consequence of the transfer portal era is every player on every single team has a third party individual that is always trying to help. And sometimes it's helping leave the current university. And it's not impossible to fathom that David Kabongo is being told that, hey, man, I know you like Stillwater. I know you like the crew that you came in with, but you're not getting as much playing time as you perhaps earned. You're not getting as many opportunities as you clearly showed even last year that you deserve. So if that's the case, play it safe. Sit out the rest of the season. Go get yourself an opportunity at X, Y, or C university. That's the downside of the transfer portal era. Is yes, there's limitations and there's regulations that dictate who can be talked to and when they can be talked to. But I can tell you, there's thousands of workarounds to that stuff. There's always going to be individuals in somebody's camp that have connections to other universities or other coaches on other staffs that might be trying to do what's best for that young man. Not always. And you and I both know that there's going to be some individuals out there that have agendas as to why they want you to transfer. And sometimes it is financial. I don't know if that's the case with David Kabongo, but it happens on a daily basis. It's called tampering to some degree, but again, there's ways around it, right? If I'm going to have a conversation with your first cousin who just so happens to be an equipment manager at Tulane, that doesn't mean that you're participating in working around the system. But if I'm talking to your cousin about Tulane and there's a bunch of crazy stuff happening at Oklahoma State and it looks like you might not have a spot, you don't know who the coaching staff is going to be, you're not getting enough opportunities to put something on film to show that you have enough to get a portal spot, then maybe that cousin who's the equipment manager at Tulane is a good outlet. And it is a good opportunity for that particular young man. So again, this stuff does happen. And it happens both ways. Like we have people that are telling other players that at other schools, like, hey, man, if whatever doesn't work out there, just know that Oklahoma State's going to bring in a new staff. And if the staff is exciting, I can plug and play you with a couple of these coaches, so on and so forth. But again, the biggest problem with David Kabongo entering the transfer portal is the fact that there was a crew of like 7 or 8 dudes that all came together. And most of them are still here. But now that this domino falls, it does open that door of, well, how many more of this crew that came together are going to be exploring the transfer portal? All right, ladies and gentlemen, Mazda gives you the opportunity to move and be moved. They craft cars for those who do simply just more than move. They're going to deliver confidence with every single ride, with more IIHS Top Safety Pick awards than anyone else as of August 2025. From the footwork to breath work, and the athletes that sweat all the details, Mazda does the same. And they bring that intentionality with every single model that they craft. You can make Everyday drives feel like an exhilarating experience. From the smooth handling and intuitive controls, the all-wheel drive is standard in almost every crossover SUV, meaning you can drive with confidence through almost any season. So like some of our players that sweat every single detail, because with Mazda, make every move count. Make it known that impossible can become irrelevant with Mazda, where you can move and be moved by Mazda. Last but not least, you got to get tickets to catch a couple of these Cowboy comeback victories, and you need to go with Game Time for that. The tailgates, the rivalries, the energy in the stands, there's nothing like the college football experience, in my opinion, but we all know that sometimes getting tickets to an event is more difficult than the battle your team's about to put up on the field. Whether it be endless queues of waiting, hidden feeds, prices jumping at checkout, Game Time resolves all of that. Game Time is the app that gives the advantage back to the fans. It's the easiest way to score last-minute tickets at the best prices with no surprise fees. What you see is what you'll pay. The app makes it super simplistic. You could even see the exact view from your seat before you purchase. You're going to love the zone deals too. You pick a section, Game Day picks the seats, and you get to save big. Honestly, it's faster, cheaper, and less stressful than any other way out there to buy tickets. So take the guesswork out of you buying college football tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONCollege, all one word, for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply, but again, that promo code is LOCKEDONCollege, LOCKEDONCOLLEGE, for $20 off. It's simple. Swipe, tap, ticket, go, and download Game Time today for all of your ticketing needs. All right, so Todd Grantham's been ran out of Dodge. Mike Gundy obviously was the precursor to that happening. And then safeties coach Greg Brown, he decides to leave Oklahoma State as well. Then we've had a couple of different safeties, including now David Kabongo, enter the transfer portal. So you would assume that maybe safety is a position that the coaching turmoil was not great. However, Kap DeDe, I was excited. I really was about Kap DeDe coming over to coach linebackers because of the connections that he had with Grantham and some of the other individuals on staff. But it's been a nightmare. Let's just call it spade a spade. The linebacker position was supposed to be the cream of the crop, the best of the bunch. And again, when you're talking about Brian McCoy coming over with 238 tackles, that's a big deal. Wendell Gregory started the season against UT Martin, and it appeared as though we had an all-American level linebacker on our hands here, Wendell Gregory. Since then, he's largely completely disappeared. Tajay McCoy, I know he had an injury here and there, but, we haven't seen a lot of advancement. Malik Charles seems to be better with his hand in the dirt as opposed to standing up. Jadavian Bradley's pretty much just a role player in this whole ordeal. Brandon Rawls, a cool story. He's likely earned a lot of the conversation coming into the season, but as we witnessed by the Baylor game, when you started Trip White, you did see a little bit of a differentiation between Trip White and Brandon Rawls. So why is Brandon Rawls starting over Trip White? Who knows? Why is Wendell Gregory and Tajay McCoy and Malik Charles seemingly regressed every single week? And then, you have somebody like a Brian McCoy, who I firmly believe loves Oklahoma State. He loves being a Cowboy. He loves the fact that we have the degree program that's going to help him launch his career into the cattle industry after this. Everything about Stillwater, Oklahoma does fit what Brian McCoy is looking to accomplish in his degrees and college experience. He had an injury, and then as the injury allowed more playing time, Ike Essenwoon shows up, and Ike Essenwoon actually looked pretty daggone good, which I must admit is slightly surprising because some of the practice clips that I am privy to, there's a decent number of our linebackers that get used and abused, and they get beat up on in practice by some of the backups, by like third stringers. So it is slightly concerning at times. But Kap DeDe doesn't see it that way. Kap DeDe doesn't seem to acknowledge the fact that some of the individuals that he's pushing for more and more and more playing time, and has been for most of the season, are the same individuals that get absolutely destroyed in practice by third stringers and scout teamers and individuals that haven't seen a millisecond of playing time this season. To me, that's slightly problematic. And if you're a Kap DeDe and you're now in a position where you know your job's on the line, why would you not be playing the best players? Not your guys that you quote unquote brought in here, that you got NIL money, that you have some affinity for. Not those dudes. Like, if you know you're coaching for your job, then play the players that in practice clearly have the best ability. And they try the hardest, and they put in the most work, and they put in the most effort. So if we're going to be getting rid of coaches mid-season, and it's probably going to be a good thing, then why are we just stopping at Grantham and Brown? Because the linebacker core was supposed to be the calling card of this defense, yet somehow magically it has not been. Even more so, we've seen a regression every single week. You can almost say we've seen a regression with every half of football. So the linebacker core that was supposed to carry us is being led by Kap DeDe, who has a PhD but happens to be currently coaching like a Riri McGee. It's insanity, ladies and gentlemen. It's insanity that Todd Grantham brought some of these guys in. Like, Ryan Osborne's been amazing. Jules Montanar, amazing. Ryan McNamara has been pretty bad A. But Kap DeDe is one of those coaches that still seemingly has an agenda that is less about Oklahoma State and more about pushing bullcrap. Like, I'm of the opinion that Brian McCoy should redshirt so he can stay at Stillwater. Because right now, playing under Kap DeDe is doing nothing. There's not a single linebacker on this football team that is helping themselves, whether it be through film or just, on the fly learning on the field. Nobody is progressing. Nobody's showing themselves capable of having bigger opportunities. And you have to wonder why. It's one of the few spots that you're seeing a clear depreciation of value every week. So if I'm a Brian McCoy and I've got a little bit of an injury and I want to stay at Oklahoma State and I want to be a part of this, I would not want to play for Kap DeDe. I'm just going to be 100% realistic with you. A lot of these individuals are very well aware that what they're supposed to be doing and what they're being asked to do, it's not working. So hopefully, Clem Bond shows signs of life, just like Doug Meacham did on the offensive side of the ball this previous week. And if the linebacker crew doesn't have a big-time Arizona performance, we already know we're going to be eating a bunch of money. Get rid of the crap, right? Because some of these guys that came in with Grantham are clearly not all that bought into Oklahoma State. And we talk about loyal and true in the Cowboy culture way. It can oftentimes start from the coaching staff. So if you've got coaches that are not reciprocal of information on the offensive and defensive side of the ball, and they create more division and they create more animosity in the locker room, get them to flip out of here. I'm so over it. All right. Anywho, that's all we're going to have for this one right here. As always, I love you. God bless. Go Pokes. Thank you for tuning in to make this your first listen here in Locked On Oklahoma State. You could be anywhere. So happy you choose to be here. Do me a favor, hit the like button if you liked it. Dislike it if you didn't. That's okay too. More importantly, share, comment, and subscribe. My podcast people out there, you're everything that makes this work. I appreciate what you do. So go do what you do. Hit the stars. Leave some reviews. All right, y'all. Later, my taters.